I'm just gonna come out and say it, I'm not a big fan of the Hunger Games. I understand it has its fans, and the franchise is not without its merit, but really there are just some elements of the Hunger Games universe and storyline that just kind of break my suspension of disbelief. And although I could get into like the nitty-gritty of specific elements that I just have a hard time wrapping around, what it really comes down to is that, really, the films, and I'm basing this solely on the films, I haven't read any of the books, although the books probably have some of the same problems, is that it's caught between the realm of theatrics and the realm of realism in terms of how its story is told. I mean, for the sake of theatrics, you've got all the stuff that happens in the Capitol, the whole media frenzy surrounding the Hunger Games themselves, and kind of the obviously supposed to be superficial nature of the whole thing. And then you've got kind of more of the realism when they're actually in the games themselves and trying to survive. And while that may have worked better in the books, in the films, it's just jarring, really. It doesn't do a good job blending the two elements really well. And I'm also just sick of the marketing of the film because, yes, I understand, you're trying to make it the next big thing. But really, the storyline just doesn't have as broad a scope of appeal as Harry Potter or Twilight. And really, I understand that, yeah, it's a story that can stand on its own, but the marketing people also need to realize that and just try to market it on its own merits instead of trying to essentially replicate the stuff that happened for the Harry Potter franchise and the Twilight franchise. It's getting kind of annoying. Marketing woes aside, does the latest entry in the Hunger Games film franchise hold up? Is it really catching fire, or is it merely smoldering like a tiny piece of charcoal? Its embers generating heat, but not really any sparks. Ending with that possibly very corny analogy, let's start with this episode of Romney's Reviews. I didn't just use that earlier analogy for the sake of making some sort of fire-related pun, because the whole charcoal giving off heat but no sparks pretty much describes the film in the sense that, well, stuff happens, but you don't get that much out of it. At least I didn't get that much out of it. It was just a bunch of stuff that happened, but it wasn't particularly memorable. And really, the biggest problem with it is that it suffers from a lot of the same things that a lot of book-based movies suffer from. And to drive a more recent parallel, it's kind of the same thing that Ender's Game suffered from, where you can tell that they were trying to cover so much ground for the sake of staying super faithful to the book and trying to kind of follow everything, but there was just no breathing room and no time to really let things sink in. The film is not without its good ideas and good moments. I mean, I like the fact that we saw Katniss dealing with the post-traumatic stress of having gone through the Hunger Games. I mean, I liked how the film handled that, but then partway through the film, it's almost just kind of brushed aside. And at the same time, a lot of the earlier scenes, as well as the ending, feel incredibly rushed as part of that same sort of effect. You can tell they were trying to bounce through as much as they could because, well, it's the second book. It's the middle of the story. Kind of has the same problem that a lot of middle films and a lot of trilogies suffer, where it's basically trying to get you from point A to point B without drawing too much attention to itself. That's really what this film felt like. The beginning felt rushed, the middle felt rushed. It had some good moments, but other than that, there just wasn't really that much to it. From a technical standpoint, the film's alright, but it's not without its problems. I mean, the editing is a bit weird in a few places, kind of adding to the feeling of the whole thing feeling rushed, but the biggest offender in this film is the nighttime scenes. I understand that it's going to be dark at night. I mean, cows go moo, the sun rises, it's dark at night. And just the problem with the shots in this film, I mean, I understand the previous film had shaky cam, but this one, it was also hard to see what was going on, because I mean, you have them kind of wandering around at night trying to outrun these various threats, but it's a real strain trying to make out what you're actually seeing because everything's so dark and there's no contrast. As a whole, this is definitely a film that's probably going to be more enjoyed by fans who have already decided to go see the film this weekend. And really, that's probably who it's really intended for. I mean, I understand they had to change directors because the director of the previous one, like, the official phrasing, or at least according to IMDb, is that he chose not to return, although they probably just chose to replace him outright. But it was just a case that you can tell that fans of the Hunger Games are going to get a lot more out of it than just the casual viewer. And while the previous film had its flaws, between The Hunger Games and Catching Fire, I preferred the previous film because at least its pacing was clear. It didn't feel as rushed. I mean, yeah, the shaky cam got kind of annoying, But at least the previous film took a little more time with the story it was telling, I guess because it was the first story and the first book, and so that one had more of a self-contained feeling. And so, really, if you're a die-hard fan, you've probably already decided whether or not you're going to see it, but as a casual moviegoer, I don't really recommend it. It's not worth the full ticket price. You're probably just better off waiting for it to come to Netflix while waiting for Mockingjay. That is probably the only real recommendation I can give it, is because it's filler. That's what it felt like. Catching Fire is essentially filler. That said, I give The Hunger Games Catching Fire a 3 out of 5. So that's it for this episode of Romney's Reviews. As for next week, against my better judgment, we're going to be getting another Black Friday double feature review. So yeah, tune in next week where I'll take a look at both Frozen and Black Nativity. See you then.